Welcome to the Oregon Employment Department's presentation on employee misclassification. My name is Trevor Leahy. I work for the Oregon Employment Department, and I'll be discussing this topic with you today. This presentation will go over some of the common classifications of workers and will mainly focus on knowing the difference between an employee and an independent contractor. We will review the actual statute and administrative rule that define independent contractors, give real-world examples whenever possible, and provide some statistical information about independent contractors for the year 2014. Please note that the laws and rules discussed in this presentation apply only to the Oregon Employment Department, Department of Revenue, Construction Contractors Board, and Landscape Contractors Board. Other agencies, such as BOLI and the IRS, use different methods for defining a worker's status as an independent contractor. A person that volunteers at a company can only be considered a volunteer if that company is a 501c3 nonprofit entity. There can also be no expectation of compensation from either the person performing the service or the business. Compensation can be anything from a paycheck to housing to a bag of corn. Anything that is given to a person in exchange for services is considered remuneration and is likely subject to tax and employment laws. If a person is performing services for a business and is receiving anything in exchange, or the business is not a nonprofit, that person is not considered a volunteer. They are an employee. Internships are usually associated with the intern's education. A paid intern is considered an employee. An internship is not made to benefit the business. Rather, it exists to benefit the person receiving the training. An internship must have an impact on the business due to the fact that the business is not running as efficiently as it would were an intern not receiving training. The first statute to be discussed is Oregon Revised Statute 657030. It defines the term employment as service for an employer performed for remuneration. We talked about remuneration on the last slide, and an employer is anyone that hires a person or persons to perform services or provide goods. Based on that, the definition for employment is fairly simple. There are many exceptions to what is considered employment, and they are found in Oregon Revised Statutes 657.035, 040, and 043 through 094. These exceptions include newspaper delivery workers, golf caddies, sports officials, and elected officials, among others. 657.040 is the exception stating that work performed by independent contractors is not considered employment. It redirects you to a different statute, which is Oregon Revised Statute 670.600. This statute defines an independent contractor almost exactly the same way as an employee is defined. The only difference is that an independent contractor is a person who provides services for remuneration and these three things. An independent contractor is free from direction and control, is licensed to perform the work if a license is required, and is customarily engaged in an independent business. We'll go into each of these three items in more detail during this presentation. Nevertheless, these three criteria are all that the Employment Department and Department of Revenue verify when determining if someone is an employee or independent contractor. Not all three of these criteria will always apply because there are jobs that do not require a license in Oregon. If someone works as a dog walker, we would not take licensing into account because you don't need a license to walk dogs in Oregon. That requirement would not apply. So the second of the three criteria would not be taken into account. A person must pass all three of these tests to be considered an independent contractor. Otherwise, the person performing the work is an employee. The first of the three criteria is figuring out who has direction and control. If the person performing the work has direction and control over the job, then they are meeting this requirement for being an independent contractor. If the person they are performing the work for has all the direction and control, then the person is not meeting this requirement and would be considered an employee. Direction and control is defined in an Oregon administrative rule. OAR 471-031-0181 tells us that having direction and control is being in charge of the means and manner for performing the work. The means are the resources, such as the tools and equipment necessary to do the job. The manner is the method by which the work is performed. This could include the shifts, the order in which tasks are performed, or other methods which demonstrate control of how the work is performed. There are many instances where some aspects of means or manner are controlled by the person for whom services are being performed, but others are controlled by the person performing the work. For this reason, we look at each situation on a case-by-case basis whenever there is a question about who has direction and control. It is also important to note that specifying a desired result does not establish control. Control is only established when one party defines how the specified results will be accomplished. The second criteria for determining whether someone is an independent contractor involves licensing. As stated earlier, not all jobs require a specific license, and questions about licensing should be directed either to the Secretary of State's office or by visiting www.oregon.gov/business. If work being performed does not require a specific license, then this test will not apply in order to determine proper classification. Some of the licenses defined within the law apply to architects and landscape architects, construction contractors, home inspectors, and locksmiths. There are many other occupations that require licenses, such as massage therapists, cosmetologists, and pawnbrokers. A large part of passing this test is dependent on who has the license. If the person performing the work is the actual licensed individual, then they are meeting this second requirement. If the person is performing work under someone else's license, then that person is either an employee of whoever holds the license or is working illegally without a license. The third and most complicated criteria for determining if someone is an independent contractor is finding out if the person has an independently established business. This is not as simple as someone just registering a business with the state. For purposes of determining classification as an employee or not, we look at 5 different sets of requirements. Please bear in mind that these 5 criteria only help determine if someone has a business or not. To make this determination and meet the criteria for having an independent business, 3 of the 5 items here must be met. The 5 criteria are maintaining a business location, bearing the risk of loss, having multiple customers or engaging in advertising, making a significant investment in the business, and having the authority to hire and fire individuals. Since a person must meet 3 of the 5 criteria to pass this test, please remember that if a person fails to meet one of these criteria, it's okay, there are 4 more chances. Also, remember that passing 3 or more of these does not automatically make someone an independent contractor. These only go towards a person having an independent business. A person passing this test would still need to have direction and control and be responsible for any required licenses in order to be considered an independent contractor. Let's review each of these 5 items individually. Maintaining a business location. The worker must have a place they conduct their business which is separate from the location of the provided services, or be in a portion of the worker's residence which is primarily used for the business. Obviously, any storefront or leased office space would meet this requirement. The gray area comes whenever someone's business is operated out of their home. This is because it can be difficult to determine what primarily means. Essentially, the business must be operated out of a portion of the home that is not used for any other purposes with equipment that is not used for other purposes. Using your own home computer for the business and then allowing the rest of the family to use the computer for non-business would result in not passing this test, as would having an office in a guest bedroom with frequent visitors. Bearing the risk of loss means that the person performing the work could be financially liable for portions of the work or incur losses from the agreed upon wages. The most frequent examples of this type of risk come from correcting defective work and purchasing liability insurance. If I get hired to come to your house and install cabinets in your kitchen, and those cabinets fall down the following week, and I come back to repair them, replace the broken hardware, and I don't charge you for that time, I'm incurring the loss from my materials and time spent when I could be working for a different customer that is paying me. The same thing goes for if I buy insurance for falling cabinetry. If it doesn't happen, I'm still purchasing the insurance, which could end up with a claim and higher insurance premiums for me. Other ways that a worker can risk loss is by entering into fixed price contracts and negotiating indemnification agreements. The law is open-ended, so this list isn't exclusive. There could be other scenarios where this test would come into play depending on the situation. Having multiple customers or conducting advertising means that the person performing the work does so for at least 2 different persons within a rolling 12-month period. If the worker does not have multiple customers, but makes a concerted effort to drum up business through advertising, then they can meet this requirement. As long as it is beyond the control of the worker and they are doing as much as possible to get more than one customer, the worker would pass this test because it is beyond their control that they have only one customer. If a person is not making a reasonable effort to obtain new business, they may not pass this test. For example, if a person offers services as an electrician in Southern Oregon and they post an ad in Baltimore, Maryland's Craigslist, we would not consider that to be a realistic effort to get more business in Oregon. Next is making a significant investment in the business. Whether it's purchasing tools or equipment, paying for the facilities where services are provided, or paying for required licenses, any investment that is made for the business and is required to perform the duties involved in the service is considered significant. The dollar amount spent is not the basis for determining if an investment is significant. Significance is based on whether the duties can be performed without the purchased item. In a case where a worker cuts nails for their customers, the $2 nail clippers could be considered a significant investment because the services could not be performed without the purchased tools. This test is also commonly seen with regard to hairdressers and stylists that rent their workstations at a salon and schedule their own appointments. The rent that they pay for the salon space is considered a significant investment, as well as the tools they use and the license that is required in Oregon. The last of the 5 criteria to determine if someone has an independently established business is that they have the authority to hire or fire other individuals to assist with the work. This does not mean that they have to use this authority. It only means that they have the option to do so. This is one of the criteria that is the most cut and dry. However, there isn't a very easy way to determine this during the hiring process without asking the question outright if they plan to hire or fire other individuals to assist with the proposed work. So those are the 5 criteria we use to determine if someone has an independently established business. With that, we have covered all of the statutory requirements needed to determine if someone is an independent contractor or employee. If a scenario doesn't fit into those criteria, it probably isn't something that is taken into account in making the determination of classification. If both the worker and the person hiring the worker agree to and sign an independent contractor agreement, we still look at the nature of the relationship and those 3 criteria to figure out what the worker is, regardless of the contract. To recap all the criteria, an independent contractor must be free from direction and control, must either be licensed or responsible for obtaining a license when required, and they must have an independently established business. To determine if someone has an independently established business, we look at whether a worker meets 3 of the following 5 sub-criteria. They must have their own business location, they must bear the risk of loss, they must provide services to 2 or more customers in a 12-month period or conduct reasonable marketing efforts, they must make a significant investment in the business, and they must have the authority to hire or fire. Now, simply creating a business entity is not enough. If a company lays off an individual on Friday and wants them to return on Monday as an independent contractor after they've registered for their new business and all their original job duties and practices remain the same, then that person is likely still an employee. Nothing changed substantially. Just because they registered a business, it doesn't make them an independent contractor. Also, a worker can provide services through a business entity. In these situations, the business meets all the requirements of being an independent contractor, and the worker would be an employee of the business providing the service. So why does any of this matter? Proper classification helps businesses and workers. For businesses, it creates a level playing field between businesses, and for workers, it grants protections that aren't provided to non-employees. Worker misclassification can lead to underfunded worker benefits such as medical, vision, and dental plans, which could drive the costs up for others. Businesses that misclassify their workers as independent contractors avoid paying taxes that are required by law on their employees and can often engage in unfair wage practices such as paying under the table or paying workers below minimum wage. All of those practices can put compliant businesses at a disadvantage. A non-compliant business that pays less than minimum wage, doesn't pay taxes or contribute to benefit packages, can potentially underbid on a contracting job that a compliant competitor cannot match. Misclassification can also lead to higher tax rates for everybody. Unemployment insurance taxes are paid into a trust fund that is self-correcting. It will always be at a certain threshold. If enough businesses stop paying taxes as required, then tax rates increase across the board for all businesses in order to meet the expected level of funds. Moving to the statistical side of the presentation, in 2014, the Oregon Employment Department alone conducted 1,354 audits in which 6,144 misclassified workers were detected. 591 businesses misclassified workers, and there were 14 industries that misclassified at least 50 workers over the year. Those misclassified workers amounted to an additional $1.2 million in unemployment insurance tax alone. Given that there are almost 120,000 businesses in Oregon, we barely scratched the surface by auditing just over 1% of the businesses. So it is easy to say that there are many more workers that are incorrectly classified as independent contractors out there in Oregon. In terms of Oregon population centers in 2014, you can see that Portland had the highest number of misclassified workers identified. This is understandable, since Portland has the highest number of businesses in the state, with nearly 23% of all businesses being located within Portland. Considering that the amount of payroll audited was over $85 million, only identifying $1.7 million in underreported payroll is an excellent ratio. If you have any additional questions about proper classification of employees, please contact any of the agencies in Oregon's Interagency Compliance Network by visiting www.oregon.gov/IC or visiting OregonIndependentContractors.com. The ICN is a group of 7 state agencies that act collaboratively on providing education and sharing information about compliance with tax and employment laws. If you have questions about licensing in Oregon, visit www.oregon.gov/business to inquire about whether any license is required for work. If you have questions or comments about this presentation or Oregon's Independent Contractor website, please contact me, Trevor Leahy, at 503-947-1542. You can also contact the Department of Revenue's Outreach Coordinator at 971-301-1805. If you have a question about a specific situation or wish to discuss the subject further, please contact one of the Employment Department's compliance specialists at 503-947-1544, extension 6. The operator will connect you with a staff member that works in your region of the state based on your zip code. Thank you very much for watching this presentation. Please use any of the resources mentioned and enjoy the rest of your day.